Everybody out there on the ABC 15 Facebook page, thank you so much for joining me and Carla this morning for our weekly education roundup, where we talk everything and anything going on in the education realm. Certainly plenty to talk about, as we now have thousands of students here in the Valley especially, who are now back in the classroom. It was a big week for that. Carla, how are things going on your end? What's on your radar right now?
They're good. You know, speaking of going back into the classroom, I've reached out this morning to the Queen Creek Unified School District. We're trying to get an update as to, you know, Danielle, I can't believe this. It's been on Monday, it will have been 4 weeks that they are back in school. And I remember being out there 4 weeks ago. It feels like it was just yesterday. So we're hoping to hear from them as far as how school is going for them. I know that, you know, yesterday was a very big day here in the East Valley. Higley Unified went back to school. We do know that Gilbert Public Schools went back in. They're doing a hybrid model. We spoke with some families there over the weekend about, you know, just how they were preparing for coming back into in-person learning. They're doing 2 days a week, and then the other 3 days seem to be kind of like an online kind of platform. Is that anything on your end that you want to add on to as far as the schools that are returning?
Yeah, I think, you know, Gilbert's doing, like you mentioned, that kind of modified hybrid type schedule, at least until September 22nd. And then assuming the metrics continue to be where they need to be, then they'll do that full in-person. Peoria Unified in the West Valley, they moved to stage 2. And so basically they're now welcoming back, you know, their real little ones, their preschoolers, some of the students in their career and tech programs, like their nursing and medical programs, some of those more hands-on programs where it's tough to do that online, and a couple of their other higher needs students. And then they'll continue to phase them in over the next couple of weeks. And then, of course, Cave Creek Unified went back yesterday, with the exception of the students at Cactus Shadows High School. There was a big kind of debate over that and what happened there with too many teachers calling out. So they effectively had to close the school yesterday for in-person learning. Now, last I had heard, they were planning to reopen today for those students, and I haven't heard otherwise yet. So, you know, we'll continue to keep an eye on that. But I think that situation in Cave Creek is kind of the latest of what we're seeing as far as, you know, communities very divided right now on this issue, where, you know, you have parents and some educators, you know, pushing to go back into the classroom. And then you have parents and educators who don't feel like it's safe to go back to the classroom. So that was in Cave Creek. And then, of course, this is kind of just the tipping point, because, you know, Carla, I had mapped out, I'm all about lists. And so I made a list of, okay, in the next few weeks, you know, what districts are going back when. And from now all the way through fall break, we have districts phasing in more students pretty much every week, including next week, where we have Mesa Public Schools, the largest school district in the state, beginning their modified in-person learning, which is very similar to what Gilbert's doing, where kids go 2 to 3 days a week and then they're at home the other 2 to 3 days a week. But, you know, this is going to be a really big one this month for back to school. And Carla, I know, you know, all of us are going to be watching those numbers really closely to see if there's any change now that we have so many students back in the classroom. Oh, Carla, can you hear me?
Definitely. And that's what we're trying to get.
Oh. Okay, I think Carla's breaking up just a little bit there. Okay, so hopefully while she's working on her side of the technology, we can catch up with her again in just a moment. I'm just kind of screening through a lot of your phone, or a lot of your comments here, not phone calls, comments here. Jamie Soti, I apologize if I mispronounced your last name. This is about a minute ago, saying kids are not learning at home. Some don't want or think they need to do work. They just sit in on Zoom and don't participate. We have heard some positive experiences with families and online learning, but there are also these frustrations that Jamie's talking about, you know, kids not being as engaged as they would be in the classroom. And I think everybody has said, you know, school districts, superintendents, even the state superintendent who I spoke with yesterday, saying online learning is not, you cannot replace in-person learning with online learning. It's not ideal. They're not the same, but the effort has been there to try to make online learning as engaging and as productive it can be. But certainly, Jamie, a concern shared by many families out there is, what is my child really learning? And, a lot of kids we've heard from too have said they want to be around, they want to be around their friends. And so that certainly fuels the frustrations surrounding this. Carla, we have you back. Yay.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I heard from, I talked to, I want to say 5 Gilbert High School students yesterday. I'm talking freshmen, I talked to 2 juniors, and I talked to 2 seniors. They all were walking to Gilbert High School. Every single one of them said we opted to come back to school because we wanted to connect with our teachers. We wanted to have that in-person connection with them. And they were excited about it. They wanted to be back in the classroom, and they said online is simply not giving us that in-person feel. I can't get that reaction from my teacher on pretty much on a, every second of the day, so to speak. They weren't able to connect the way they wanted to be connecting. And so one child even told me, I think my parents are happy to have me out of the house. We are 5 kids in the house, and my parents are both working from home. So you can imagine how difficult that could be for a family. So we welcome those students back into the classroom. It was a very different feel, Danielle. I want to say it was just, it was very somber. It wasn't the normal hustle and bustle that we usually get when it's, kids are, especially a high school of that, of that size. But it was definitely back to in-person learning for Gilbert.
Yeah. Well, and, just retouching on the Cave Creek situation, and, this has become a divisive issue, unfortunately, in many communities. And specifically what happened in Cave Creek, just to make sure that everybody is aware of kind of all of the details that led up to this. During Cave Creek's board meeting last week, when they were talking about returning to in-person on September 8th. The superintendent actually recommended against it, saying that she thought they should stay remote until their benchmarks look a little better. And they did ask, do we have any gauge if the teachers in our district would return if we made that decision to go back on the 8th? And they had conducted an informal little survey within the district where all the principals asked their teachers, and 38% of the teachers said they would not return if they voted to go back on the 8th. So they voted to move forward with that anyway and to continue on the 8th anyway. But those concerns from those teachers were voiced and were already there before that decision was even made. And so in talking with some of those teachers, one of the common arguments that some people use is, well, if you're going to the grocery store or if you're going anywhere in public, you should be able to be back in the classroom. And one thing that they talked about, especially at the high school, is that you do have these larger class sizes and teachers are contained in these classrooms with their students. And so that's something that, makes them feel more vulnerable, and that, they're at more risk than as opposed to going to the grocery store where you can walk an aisle over or kind of distance yourself from someone else. And so I definitely got a feel from a lot of the teachers I spoke with that they genuinely are concerned about safety, but many of them do understand the frustration that parents have. And, the data does look better. The metrics right now recommend modified learning. Districts like Cave Creek and Higley are back in person. So, it's tough because I think you can see both sides of the issue. And at the end of the day, it's tough to know what exactly is the right choice. And I think a lot of districts and really a lot of families are still struggling with that right now.
Absolutely. And, one thing that I want to bring up as we send our kids back into the classroom is, we don't really know what it's going to look like on a day-to-day basis, right? On a minute by minute. I know that there's a school out here in the East Valley, and they went through the entire day frame, and they went ahead and assigned, this is when the kids will be wearing masks. This is when they will not. This is when social distancing will not be available to them. This is when it will. And so they have gone through almost like a minute by minute case of a child's day. And this is a K through 8 school. So we're talking the younger kids. But in the high school settings, you know, I don't think they can necessarily detail it that far. I mean, I know you've been inside Queen Creek High School, Queen Creek High School. And what were you able to see there, Danielle, as far as that day-to-day operation of social distancing and mask wearing?
Yeah. So when we went out to Eastmark High School in Queen Creek, and, you know, I'm going to put this out there as well. You know, Eastmark is their newer high school. It's state of the art. I haven't been inside the other schools, so I can't speak to what is happening in those schools there. But I know when we went to Eastmark, you know, you have the tape on the floor directing kids which directions to walk in the hallways. One thing that they did with their cafeteria is they split lunch into 3 different times so that they could space out how many kids were in the cafeteria. The kids, when they eat, aren't wearing their mask, but the tables are set apart. They sit 2 to a table. All the food is prepackaged so that they can just take it and go to their seat. In the classrooms that we saw, they had dividers up in between. Like if it was a desk with 2 students, you know, there'd be a divider in between. Teacher way at the front, all of them wearing masks in the classroom. So we did see a lot of that, but at the same time, you know, I think districts have been very open and honest in saying, I know I've heard this in several board meetings, that it's impossible to completely physically distance in a school setting. You can't do it. And, you know, even when we were at Queen Creek, and I'm sure these other schools, you know, kids are still, you see them together. Now they're all wearing masks. They're all going the same direction, but there's only so many hallways and you have so many kids, you know? So I think people also have to just understand that you can't get to 100% physical distancing in a school. It's not possible. And especially with our class sizes here and some of the struggles that education has had already in the past, it makes it even tougher. So, you know, districts are trying. And I talked to, actually I spoke with the Maricopa County Superintendent and our state superintendent this week. And, you know, both of them said that districts are doing what they can, and that there's really that this is unprecedented. You know, a lot of it is, okay, well, this is what we're going to do based on what we know right now, but we know that could change in tomorrow, you know, at the end of today. So it's just a tough situation for everybody right now, for sure. Oh, I think Carla might be frozen again. Okay, so while Carla's working on her connection, I want to bring up something that we're looking forward to, or something that we are looking ahead to tonight. Scottsdale Unified School District is set to have their governing board meeting where they could make a decision on a timeline to return to in-person learning. There's been a lot of concern in the Scottsdale district from parents. We've heard from a lot of families who are, quite frankly, upset that in-person learning has not started yet. I did watch most of their board meeting last week, and they were going back and forth on this idea of, do we vote to just move forward with some sort of a hybrid option, or do we go back to our parents and send a survey and see what they're thinking now? Because the last survey they did was over the summer. And again, as we know, things can change very quickly. So they ultimately decided to send out that survey. They sent out the survey, and tonight they'll be discussing those survey results, and again, could make a decision on establishing some sort of a timeline for when they will return to in-person. So that's something we'll be watching tonight. Last night, the Deer Valley Unified School District, they had their governing board meeting. Some parents had told us that they were planning on attending and being outside of that meeting to express their desire for the district to reopen for in-person. What they wound up doing, and I'm going to see if I can screen share this with you, because it's actually a tweet that they sent out. Let's see. I'm going to screen share for you. Just give me one moment here. Make sure that okay, here we go. I think this is it. Yep. Okay. So this is what was tweeted out from the Deer Valley Unified School District from their meeting last night. I know there's so many meetings. It's really hard to keep track of everything that's going on. Trust me, I have a giant spreadsheet, and it's still really tough for me too. So sometimes I have to rely on the updates coming from the districts themselves. This is a proposed return to in-person learning from the Deer Valley Unified School District last night. So they're going to consider this for a future meeting. So they didn't decide on anything, but this is what's on the table for them. And you'll see September 24th is when they would start phasing in students. You've got your pre-K, your Head Start, kindergarten. Interesting that they put high school seniors in the front, because usually we've seen them phasing in those younger grades earlier, but they're proposing to start the phase in September 24th, continue it for several weeks, and then you'd have all students back in school October 14th. So that's after fall break. And that's very similar to some of the plans that we've seen from Peoria. Kyrene also has a similar plan. Kyrene, Dysart, and Mesa are set to start their phase-ins next week. So several districts have taken this phased in approach with the goal of not having so many students coming back at one time. And all of them have pretty much started with those preschoolers and those kindergartners. Carla actually did a story recently on why that is. She spoke with a developmental pediatrician about the importance of, especially for those little ones, getting them back on campus as soon as possible. And in fact, we heard that in the Scottsdale Unified meeting last week. Their superintendent, Dr. Menzel, said, where he's really concerned are those kindergartners, first and second graders who really need to be back in the classroom. And so tonight we'll have to see if that's something that comes through in their vote. So that's something that we will definitely be watching. I mentioned earlier, and I'm kind of checking our questions here. Oh, Andrea Morgan has a great question here. This is from about a minute ago. She says, will they still phase in if the numbers go up after the Labor Day holiday? So that is a great question, because that is something a lot of people are watching, right? Labor Day, more people out and about, more people traveling. And we've talked about how more businesses and restaurants opening up at the same time as in-person learning is beginning has the potential to create a surge in cases. And so all of the districts that I have followed anyway, for the most part, all kind of have an asterisk by their plan that says, is all assuming that the data continues to look good, that the data continues trending in the right direction. And so, Andrea, I would say, if the numbers go up after the Labor Day holiday, they may develop some sort of a time frame of, okay, if this continues to be a trend, then we may need to scale back. But it's certainly something that districts are watching. And in those recommended state benchmarks as well, it has that recommendation of if percent positivity goes above 7, I think it's if it goes above 7% or if it reaches 9%, that they recommend pulling back on your in-person. Is that what you recall, Carla?
Yes. And I know that Chandler, if we want to talk about Chandler here for a little bit, they had a meeting last week and they were actually shocked by what came out of the board. I talked to Dave Evans and he said, I was the swing vote in that decision there to allow kids to come back into the classroom. And I'm hearing from a lot of Chandler parents and teachers, and I'm sure you are as well, Danielle, about them, this really kind of coming, they weren't expecting it. They were all kind of waiting for that after the first quarter was over to go back to school. And so they're going back, kinder, first and second are going back next Monday. And then third through sixth grade are going back the following week. And then it's the junior high through high school that are going back after the fall break. And so that's October 13th. And so, but there's a caveat to that. There's definitely that asterisk in there, as you mentioned, Danielle, that, if the numbers for some reason start coming back up, the board kind of has that discretion to say, hey, let's wait a second. Let's look at these numbers again. And I think just about every district that I've listened in on, I know for sure the Madison Elementary School District is doing that. They are really having those numbers, really the data dictate how and when they move forward. If I heard the data 1,000 times during that Madison Elementary School District, I'd have a canister full of pennies for every time that they said the word data, because
they are very, very driven by that. As you know, and you can have that confidence in knowing that these folks in that district are doing everything they can to really let that data be the driving force, as opposed to what a neighboring school district is doing or what this other district is doing. One thing they mentioned at that Madison Elementary School District is Maricopa County is one of the largest counties in the U.S. So what happens in Apache Junction, Maricopa County, may not necessarily be what's happening in Avondale, or may not necessarily be what's happening in Central Phoenix as far as the numbers are concerned. So anyway, I know I kind of veered off on many districts here. I went from Chandler to Madison, but I know that every meeting that I've listened in on, I've always heard that definitely that asterisk of them saying, hey, you know, if these numbers aren't going in the right direction, we're going to definitely scale back.
Yeah, and that's a great transition into the conversation I had with Superintendent Hoffman yesterday. So it's like you were reading my mind, Carla. You knew exactly what I was going to get to next. But I asked her how she felt about the benchmarks. Did she feel like those state benchmarks and the county benchmarks as well, that they were serving their purpose? And she said that overall, she was generally pleased with how districts were using them to guide their decision making. She did point out that she thinks it's unfortunate that she feels like in some communities the benchmarks have become politicized. And she said that's where at least she's hearing where a lot of the frustration and the big divides are kind of in those communities that are sparring over those benchmarks and the validity of the benchmarks. But she said overall she's pleased. She's happy with how districts are using them. I did ask her about this idea of a statewide or a regional plan. You know, it's kind of late right now to do that, but as far as something long-term, we had heard that from the Arizona Education Association yesterday. They still feel like there needs to be a statewide plan so that you don't have districts doing different things all over the place at different times, just to try to get some consistency and cut down on some of that division. And she was very honest, as she usually is, which I appreciate. And she said, look, kind of like you had said, Carla, you know, our state has been local control for forever. And so she said to take power away from the districts would require some serious heavy-handedness from the governor. And that is something she said, I don't think we would expect that from our governor. So basically saying, not going to happen. You know, this is how it's going to be. So she was very candid about that. And I also asked her, I said, you know, we have teachers and staff who are calling out from schools, effectively shutting down in-person learning at those schools. What's your response to that? Mm-hmm. And she said that she thinks it's unfortunate that, again, that there's this divisiveness in some of these communities. But she also said that she understands their concerns, that at the end of the day, it's about feeling safe in your workplace. And do teachers and staff feel safe? And if they don't, then this is what we're seeing happen. And so she didn't necessarily say she supports that method or not, but she just said she understands those concerns.
Where we're at, right? I want to give up a comment about Mr. Pearson. He talked at about 10:18 this morning on our little thread here. So it's a while back, but I think he hit the nail on the head with all of this. And that is education reform and getting parents involved. And Danielle, you and I had an education meeting with our team yesterday, and we were talking about parents. Thank you, Aaron Pearson. Education reform is underway. Parents need to get more involved and step up. And Danielle, I know you've talked to the Maricopa County Superintendent about parents becoming involved. I know that last week when I spoke with a parent going back into the hybrid program, her 3 kids in Gilbert, she said, oh, Carla, I've been watching all of the Gilbert school board meetings. And she directed me right to the school board meeting. She sent me the link to it for the YouTube video. And I just thought, oh my goodness, you know, a year ago, I don't know if we had this much involvement from parents that they knew exactly when the board was meeting, what time, what day, and they were actually like listening in. And so, you know, I think that's neat. That's awesome. That's our civic duty. Us parents, I mean, we have, you know, our civic duties to vote, but then this for us to get involved, right? And to really know what issues our board is handling. And they handle so much of our kids' education. So
And it goes hand in hand with that civic duty, because something else we talked about in that meeting, as we look ahead to the November election, we have well over 100, at least 100 last time I checked, people running for school board positions. And, you know, those are elected officials. I mean, they're normal people who want to get involved. They're elected. And something the Maricopa County Superintendent always says is that is probably the position, the elected position that will impact your life and your family, if you have kids, the most.
Yes.
Because they, you know, like you said, they have the ability to make decisions that impact your children and therefore you on a daily basis. And so really encouraging people to look at their school boards, look at who's running for school boards, vote for your school board candidate, you know, get involved and stay involved. And especially with things being all virtual right now, it's easier to listen and to see what's going on. But, you know, Carla, I think that's a great point, that if there is a silver lining of some sorts in this situation, it's that I think parents and the community as a whole really have realized what their schools do in their community, and how important it is to be in tune with what's happening and to be involved and to weigh in on what's happening as well.
Mm-hmm. And I know the meetings are super long for the most part. It's never a short meeting.
Yes, they are.
You know what? I belong to a Facebook group, and you know what they've done is they kind of break up the meeting into chunks. So one mom will do the first hour, another mom will do another hour, and then they'll kind of brief each other or brief us all in that Facebook group, so that, you know, if it's a 4-hour meeting, because we know last week Chandler went to like 11 o'clock at night. So it's like, you know, here we are working 8 hours a day and then working with our kids and listening to a 4-hour meeting. I don't think so. But it's really, it takes a village, right? And so if we want to know what's happening, we got to be involved. And so thank you, Mr. Pearson, for saying that earlier. I appreciate that very, 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 very much. It's
very important. I know, Carla, we had touched on this idea of nutrition services now that we have kiddos back in school, some still at home. What are you kind of tracking on that front right now?
You know, I know that, you know, with the allergies that our so many children have, it's so important. The labeling is so important. And I know that in many of these cases, in many of these smaller schools, what they will be doing is they'll be keeping kids in their own classrooms. So they won't necessarily be going to the cafeteria. And so I know of one school that they are prohibiting any peanuts. We know that peanut is one of the biggest allergies out there. And not that it's the only one, but it's one of the main ones. And so just because these kids are being kept really, really in their classroom and really away from having that, you know, community coming together, like in a cafeteria setting. And so this one school out here in Chandler is doing that. They're saying just absolutely no peanuts whatsoever. Let's just play it safe. And so that's what I know. I don't know if you've been finding out other information as far as nutrition is concerned.
I know that as far as, you know, we saw over the summer, the district still having grab and go meals available and making sure that kids are getting the meals that they need. I know there's only plans to continue that going forward. John Genovese did a great story last weekend, I think, on some concerns about basically the money running out from the USDA and, you know, how are schools going to keep this up when they had to start those summer meal programs so early when schools closed. And shortly after he did that story, we learned that the USDA had decided to continue that summer meal program all the way through the end of the year. So hopefully that will give some folks some peace of mind. But, you know, something I thought of when you were talking about kids with allergies, and it's interesting when you have kids on hybrid schedules coming at different days and different times. And, you know, from a nutrition worker perspective, from a school nurse perspective, you know, keeping track of those kids who may have special needs and require more attention. I would imagine that gets harder as you're trying to figure out what kids are on campus, which days, and, you know, all the extra protocols that go into it. So that might be something worth maybe we can, you know, look into too, of just how these hybrid schedules and the phased in approaches how that kind of impacts on the school nurse end or the guidance counselor end, or just kind of keeping track of who's on campus when.
Who's on campus when.
Yeah.
And I think maybe that's the reason why at this particular school, it was like absolutely just no peanuts, just a blanket statement. Hasn't ever been this way. You just distance yourself from that child who may be allergic, or that child knows. But in this case, because we're just, they're just returning back to in-person learning, they just want to be safe. One other thing that I wanted to bring up, because we brought it up last week, we talked about that kinder first and second grade wave of kids going in first. And so I talked to Dr. Ron Melmed. He's from the Melmed Center. He's a developmental pediatrician. We talked to him yesterday. And then I also talked to a child advocate, Katie McPherson, both of them, about this situation. And I said, what is it about that age group that is so important? And Dr. Melmed, the one thing he said is the social emotional component. He goes, it's really at that age where kids are learning all of these basic life skills, learning how to share, learning how to be your self-advocate, right? Learning how to defend yourself in the playground if something's not going your way, or learning how to talk to an adult, learning, and not that they don't know how to talk to an adult, but in a group setting, learning to raise your hand and it's not your turn, waiting, being patient. All of those skills that are just really foundation, they are so crucial. And he said the social emotional was his number one thing. Katie McPherson on the other side, she also said all of the fine motor skills and the gross motor skills that a child needs, sitting in a chair for 30 minutes, right? And not wiggling yourself. That's a skill that we all need to. Sometimes some adults need to learn that skill.
I know. I'm sitting here like,
So anyway, I'm putting that together.
Great.
Tomorrow, and I'm hoping to have it for our audience here in the next couple of days. I know Kyrene Elementary has talked about those early learners. Chandler is sending those early learners, starting, as I mentioned earlier, next week. And then I know Madison Elementary has also talked about those early learners. So just wanted to let everyone know that story is coming.
Yeah. And then the developmental pediatrician you spoke with will also be joining us for our Facebook town hall tomorrow, right?
Yes, he is. And, Dr. Ron Melmed has been in the Valley for a very long time. And I mean, just from talking to him, I felt so motivated and just so, he sees the cup half full. If I can summarize how that interview went, he was just so positive and so uplifting. He said, if anything we can learn from this, we need to be encouraging to our children and at all times. And they are building resiliency to all of this. They are learning coping skills. They are problem solving, whether they're at, on a hybrid model or an at-home model. And so you're going to hear from him a lot tomorrow as well. And his point tomorrow, Danielle, will be more on the child mental component, not so much obviously coronavirus. It's more on the developing brain of a child.
Yeah, that'll be great. Carla and I are doing tomorrow's education town hall on the ABC 15 Facebook page. Starts at noon, and we will also have Maricopa County Superintendent Steve Watson joining us. So he'll be able to answer questions, talk about some of the most common questions he's getting as he hears from superintendents, parents, students, multiple times a day. And so he'll be a great resource as far as if you have a question, where can you find that information? And just to kind of give us a good pulse of what he's hearing from the education community right now. There's one comment on here. I know we only have about 10 minutes left, so I want to make sure that we fit this in. Sherry, at about 10:32, she chimed in saying Governor Cuomo is requiring schools to post positive tests daily for each school. That is the only safe way to open. Schools in Arizona have no reporting requirement. Now, I don't bring this up to talk about Governor Cuomo and what's happening in other states, but more the reporting requirement for schools in our state. And so right now, it's my understanding, and we talked about this a couple of weeks ago when the order officially came out, that schools, if they have a positive case on campus, Okay, I'm not sure what just happened there, but okay, let's try again. Basically, when it comes to schools having cases on campus, they are required to report them to their county health department. And then the county will work with them, do the contact tracing, and guide them as to who they need to notify on their campus who may have been exposed. So they are not required to send out an email to every family in the district or every person in the district to say, hey, this happened at one of our schools. Now, I did ask Superintendent Hoffman yesterday if she thought that schools should be more transparent than they're required to be. So we know the requirement, but asking, should they be more transparent than that? And she said that she would advocate for more transparency, saying that, more transparency will just give families and staff members more confidence in knowing that they're making well-informed decisions. Chandler Unified has said that they are going to set up their own kind of dashboard where they will say, how many cases they have by school site. Now, obviously, they can't tell you who had it or give identifying information, but that's the only district I know of so far who has said they're going to put that up on their website. Again, they're not required to do that, but that's something that they've chosen to do, and it'll be interesting to see if other districts follow suit. But as far as some community members want that, but that's not a requirement for the schools to do.
Danielle, I know you covered this. Combs had a positive case, right? And what did they do? They sent out a letter and they gave out a little bit more information. No, that was Kyrene. They gave out a little bit more information than what we were normally used to getting from a school district.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, Kyrene they listed the exact classroom, the 2 exact bus routes. And this was when they were, they're still only offering in-person support services. So there's only a handful of people on those campuses. And so, but I'm assuming they did that so that they could help anybody who may have concerns or, to come to the table. But we're seeing different things from different districts. Queen Creek has had some positive cases reported. And every time we ask them about those cases, we get a very standard reply that they work with the county health department and notify everyone who needs to be notified. Doesn't matter what you ask, that is the response that we get. Whereas in, Peoria and Kyrene, like you mentioned, I mean, they sent us the letter that they sent out to families. They told us exactly how many students were impacted or possibly exposed. And then actually Dysart had one not too long ago. And they were able to say when it happens and just that they had notified everybody who may have been exposed. So it really varies.
Yeah.
Based on the district. But as far as that requirement, it's just that they reach out to their health department, report it, and then work with them to contact trace and figure out who exactly needs to be notified.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something that, I made sure to ask yesterday because I know a lot of people, that's the big question. Maricopa County Superintendent Steve Watson even said, the other day, that's one of the biggest questions that he gets is, what happens if someone gets COVID on campus? And his response was, it depends. And, he admitted that that's not an answer that anybody wants to hear, but it really does depend on the situation and how the districts choose to handle it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Legacy at Queen Creek. Ray Ellen just said, Legacy at Queen Creek has had several cases so far. And, I think, Danielle, as kids head back to school, thank you, Ray, we are going to see cases come about because we're reintroducing these children back into the community. So it would be ignorant for us to think that will be no cases that come about. They will come about. I think the bigger question now becomes as we get into the fall, right? How do we handle those cases that come about, and how severe are those cases? So far, we haven't heard of any severity in children that I have heard of or that our newsroom has come across. And that's all information that's going to come from parents. I don't think that the districts will be the ones telling us, obviously, all of that information is protected by HIPAA. Right. But yeah, we are going to definitely, in my opinion, and I know that I've interviewed plenty of people and everyone's telling me, I talked to a nurse practitioner who does COVID-19 testing for the city of Phoenix every weekend. And she said, Carla, they are definitely going to go up. It is a given that this is going to happen. So we know that, right? We're coming into this knowing that these numbers are definitely gonna see an uptick for our kids.
Yeah. And that's definitely something that we will be, watching as more districts continue to go back to school over these next few weeks, phasing in students. And as we get closer to fall break, we have at least a dozen districts who have said that they would not return to in-person.
Yeah, I don't know. So I think there she is.
Yeah, okay, there we go. And so as we get closer to that, we'll be watching that as well. So I think, we're having more technical difficulties than we usually do today. So it's probably a good time to kind of wrap this up, especially because Carla and I will be back with you tomorrow on Facebook, on the ABC 15 Facebook page at noon for our education town hall. And of course, we welcome any questions, comments, especially for the two experts that we have. But thank you so much for taking time this morning to join us. Carla, any final words before we say goodbye?
I just want to wish all those kids that went back to school this week, those that are heading back next week, I'm wishing them the very best. I'm wishing their parents the very best. And the cup is half full, and let's be respectful of each other. Whatever your decision is, whether you're staying home with your kids, that's very good too. If you're sending them back, that's awesome as well. Everyone, we just need to really, really just support each other because we're all in this together. That's kind of my motto. That's become a little bit of my motto. So that's all I have. What about you? Do you have any last words for our audience?
I think we covered a lot, and there's plenty more to get to. And so we will pick some of this back up tomorrow at noon.
Okay.
All right. Bye, everybody. Have a great day.